our present day, we can see so many examples of how religion is a powerful thing that can motivate both great bloodshed. In ancient times, here's an example of an Aztec temple where people would be ritually sacrificed. Some accounts said that thousands of people lined up in a queue that was miles long to ascend the steps and be very brutally murdered. In medieval times, we see the example of the Crusades, which was clashing between members of two religions. And the people from Europe in the Crusades would get a papal indulgence, so that meant that they could go and their sins that they had done in the past before they went to fight in the Crusades could be forgiven. So a lot of people had this idea in mind. And in the modern day, we see lots and lots of conflict that has been sparked by conflicts about which countries should exist. So for instance, maybe some of you have heard of how Iran, or the leadership of Iran, is saying death to Israel and stuff like that. A lot of that can be religiously motivated as well. So we see all these different conflicts over time happening in the name of religion. And we also see beautiful temples, beautiful cathedrals, towering spires, great works of art, the frescoes on the Sistine Chapel, minaret-topped mosques, and Dome of the Rock here in Jerusalem with its gold-capped dome that makes the skyline there so famous. So you see how all these great works of art, these great buildings that have inspired generations, have been built as well in the name of religion. And here you see also the Book of Kells, and this is a page depicting St. Matthew, and the Book of Kells was very painstakingly, this was all done by hand, so every single little colored line, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see how incredible it is that every single page with these tiny little swirls, somebody just went in and did that very carefully over and over again with a paintbrush. So really intricate right there. Also another example of extremely intricate work. Here we have a statue from a Hindu temple and a line from the Quran in Arabic. This is from a Tunisian Quran, so you can see how they used gold paint and went over that to outline it, and then there's a decoration over there as well. So definitely you can see how the impact of religion has profoundly shaped and changed our world over time. But I want to ask you, what is religion exactly? What do you think religion is? And could the teacher please call?
Yeah, they're a little bit shy. Is there anybody who wants to offer what we talked about as religion?
There's no right or wrong answers here.
Okay. Yeah, right here, go ahead. One of the students offered the beliefs, the spiritual beliefs of a culture, what they idolize as God.
Great, the spiritual beliefs of a culture, what they idolize as God. That is a pretty amazingly eloquent definition. All right, great. What are some other definitions you can offer?
Josh, go ahead and say that out loud.
It's what people believe for certain groups and how they worship it.
Okay, it's what people believe in. Oh, sorry.
Did you hear that okay?
Yeah, I think I did. Certain rules and how they worship it. Yeah. Okay. Great. So does anyone want to provide an example of like certain rules that we've gotten from, it could be any religion?
The Ten Commandments.
Okay.
Is offered.
Great. So the Ten Commandments is a perfect example of rules that people of that religion would live by. So from the Christian tradition. Now, what are some other examples of rules from religions? Anyone have ideas?
The 5 Pillars of Islam.
The 5 Pillars of Islam. Great. Great example. And anyone have any other examples?
Sorry? The Eightfold Path from the Four Noble Truths from Buddhism.
Great. The Eightfold Path from Buddhism. Great. So we see some of the Abrahamic religions, so Judaism, Islam, and Christianity have rules which are very distinct from the Ten Commandments. Is a perfect example. And then we also see, say, from Buddhism, the Eightfold Path, different guidelines. Confucianism, which is sort of more of a philosophy, but I included in this presentation because it's been a huge shaper in the Asian culture. Shaper? Well, anyway, Confucianism has a lot of guidelines as far as how to set a harmonious society that involve, listen to your parents, listen to the king, wives, listen to your husbands. So some that you can see is maybe not quite as applicable today, but definitely some of those same rules, guidelines you can see in Asia, you can see in the Middle East, you can see in Africa, you can see in the Americas. So a lot of these rules of different religions maybe they developed independently of each other, but you see a lot of similar trends. So we'll be looking at some of those trends as well. Here's a dictionary definition of religion, which is pretty dense because there's a few of them. People's beliefs and opinions concerning the existence, nature, and worship of a deity or deities, and divine involvement in the universe and human life. An institutionalized or personal system of beliefs and practices relating to the divine, a set of strongly held beliefs, values, and attitudes that somebody lives by. So you see how this definition of religion can be very diverse. Now, by number 3, a set of strongly held beliefs, values, and attitudes that somebody lives by. What if I said, all right, I have this set of attitudes, a set of beliefs that I'm going to live by. I'm not going to kill anybody. I'm not going to just take stuff that isn't my own and a bunch of other things. But I don't believe in a God. Would you say that that's still a religion?
You call that a religion?
Okay, I see some nodded heads. Anyone think it wouldn't be a religion?
Does that not sound like a religion to anybody? Just living by some guidelines that told you what was right and what was wrong. We have some people agreeing with that.
Alright, so if you think that having a set of guidelines for yourself would not be a religion if you don't have a God, then can you explain why? Does anyone want to elaborate so we can have a bit more of a two-way discussion?
Why is it that, I'm repeating your question, but why is it that just having some guidelines that you're living your life by, why would you think that is not religion? Why would that not fit the definition of religion? Kristen? She offered that those would be values, but it doesn't explain how humans came to be present on Earth and what happens to them after they die. So that part will be missing. Interesting. Okay, so there's a component of sort of why are we here, where are we going that isn't in a set of values. Okay, so by this definition, a set of beliefs, values, and attitudes that somebody lives by would count as a religion. But it's also interesting to see how we can have a discussion where if it doesn't explain some of the crucial questions that humans have been asking, so why, where are we going, things like that, then it's not a religion. Okay, so I think that you make a very valid point there. When we think about religion, it's really important to consider what are the important beliefs and values really at the core of its religion. How do people exemplify those beliefs and values, and how do we really understand this as global citizens? So why do you think religions exist? Why do you think religions exist? What do you think? One student reiterated sort of that it does help humans explain some of those fundamental questions that they've always been asking.
Okay, so it explains fundamental questions. Definitely, if religion can provide possible answers to questions like why do certain events happen, where do we come from, how should we live and act, where are we going, is there an afterlife, will doing good in the present world help us in the next life? These are all different things that various religions try to answer. So many different religions have different ideas of what happens after you die. So anyone want to give some different examples?
They talked about going to heaven in some of the monotheistic religions.
Right, so in a lot of the Abrahamic religions, monotheistic traditions, there's the afterlife, heaven, or possibly hell depending on maybe what you did in your life on earth. Any other ideas? What are some other things that happen?
Star, go ahead, say nice and loud. Reincarnation, coming back in another life.
Reincarnation, so you could come back, the wheel keeps on turning. You might come back as a bug or you might come back as a princess. It could really depend. So yeah, great. So we see reincarnation, we see an afterlife, and a lot of times this could be dependent on, again, how well you behaved. So you might come back as something that was really unpleasant if you weren't such a great person before. And this is something that you see as a commonality across a lot of different religions. So sort of as a factor that might motivate people to behave better. But at the very basic level, religions do help to answer a lot of questions. Now here's a question for you. Do you think that science would ever provide kind of an alternate way of answering these questions that would satisfy the need for religion?
What are some of your thoughts on science answering these questions as opposed to religion answering these questions? Macy? Yeah, I'll sort of paraphrase what she said. She said that people coming from a religious aspect of answering the question or a scientific aspect of answering the question would have a hard time understanding where the other one is coming from, although they both feel like their answers are being satisfied.
Interesting. Okay. I'm glad that you provide that perspective. So let's say if we were to think of where do we come from, and you were to take a traditional look from Genesis of the Bible, and then you compared that, say, to Darwin's theory of evolution, which is sort of what people did back in the Scopes monkey trial. Have any of you heard of that? Sort of more of a history of science thing. Anyhow, so theory of evolution was pretty controversial not too long ago for teaching in high school biology, because a lot of people felt that science in this case was clashing with religion. They felt that the answers to this where do we come from question really couldn't be reconciled. So I'm asking this question because I want to see what you think on whether science and religion can kind of just play nicely together, or whether answers to questions like this will clash. So in the case of that trial, which was about one high school teacher who decided to teach evolution anyway, a lot of people really thought that this was going against the teachings of the Bible and thus shouldn't have been taught in a public high school. So really key milestone in U.S. history in teaching and for science, and a great example of one of those flashpoints about religion, science, and belief. So today we'll be learning about several different religions from around the world. Probably you guys are familiar with some of them already. As I heard when I asked about different rules from religions you knew about, I heard 5 pillars of Islam, I heard the Eightfold Path as well, later about Buddhism. So this is great. We'll explore traditions and rules and different denominations of some religions. What do you think is the reason that we should be aware of different religions, different cultural traditions from around the world?
Hey, you guys are offering great answers, but if you could stand up, I think it would project the microphone better, and so I wouldn't have to read. I heard your voice. So if you want to answer, you guys are doing a fantastic job. If she asks a question, we'd like to hear your answers. If you can just raise your hand, I'll call on you. Just stand up for a second. I think your voice will project down the microphones better. So Steph, why don't you show us how that's done?
Not to offend anyone.
Did you hear what she said, Adora?
I heard not to offend anyone. Okay, great. That is actually a good example. Believe it or not, yeah, learning about lots of different world religions will help you when you start traveling. As a great case in point, when I went to Dubai, which is in the United Arab Emirates, so in the Middle East, that was really fun. And really, Dubai is an extremely liberal country in the Middle East, so unlike Saudi Arabia, like women aren't required to wear veils or anything like that. Dubai is really glitzy and it has malls and it's fairly westernized. When you go to Dubai, you will see a lot of women walking around in the full-length head veil. So definitely that was something new for me. But because I knew a lot about, why women were wearing this and the traditions from Islam, then going there, it was definitely, you walk around and you just take it as a learning opportunity. Whereas if I had no idea what was going on, I would be like, whoa, why are all these women wearing head veils? And it would be like a little bit disrespectful to just be staring or something like that. So definitely go to another country that has different traditions, or as another great example, if you're going to Jerusalem and you see men with like full-length beards and wearing hats, you kind of know, okay, so here are some Orthodox Jewish people. And that's really cool to be able to travel around the world and have that understanding of world religions. And it also allows you to, as we said earlier, not offend anyone. And when you ask questions, they can be a little maybe more respectful or go beyond, so why are you wearing that? Not to offend anyone. What else?
What is another reason why it's important to learn about the different religions around the world? And remember, I know both Mr. Black and I will be awarding bonus points for you asking or answering questions or volunteering. So, absolutely. Anybody else have a good reason why you should be, it's important to learn about the religions around the world?
To avoid being ethnocentric.
To avoid being ethnocentric, great. So we live here in the United States, maybe some of you have heard the term, we're a big melting pot. Anyone familiar with that?
Yes, heard the melting pot before.
Okay, well, so melting pot is basically this concept that all different kinds of cultures, immigrants come and melt in the pot. Okay, that's actually like a sort of weird thing to think about, but it's sort of like you see how we have, you can walk down the street and you'll see a Russian deli, and you'll see a Mexican taco place, and you'll see a Chinese takeout. Okay, that's a food-based example, but in a lot of places you can see great examples of where the melting pot has really happened, where there's immigrants, where there are different kinds of cultural traditions. If any of you have been to New York, and maybe you've been to like Chinatown and Little Italy and all the different enclaves. So the melting pot is this concept of really culture melding together. And in the United States, we have immigrants from really all corners of the earth. And as a result, there are a lot of different religions present, practicing members of different religions in the United States. So being aware of really everyone makes us not just focused on our own little world where we see people of mainly, from the same background every day. We can really think about the larger world and the world outside our neighborhood, our community, our school. That's a pretty awesome thing to know. Now, at the same time also, as global citizens in this connected world, it's really important to know more about the world that we share with billions of other people if we want to be truly aware and informed. And if you're familiar with conflicts going on right now, then you know, so for instance in Afghanistan, how many of you heard about the incident where some Qurans were burned while U.S. Army officials were cleaning out a base?
Anybody hear about that story?
So that was a really big news story because of what happened afterwards. So these Qurans were burned, and news of that fact leaked out to members of the local population, and that leaked further to become a really big global incident. And as a result, many people went protesting, some soldiers were killed, there were casualties on both sides, American flags got burned, huge protests of hundreds of people went marching by through the streets in different cities throughout Afghanistan because the people on this army base had burned Qurans, which was basically, if you think about it, burning a holy book of any religion, plus you add to that the tensions that were already there about the United States being in Afghanistan, and it was really a hugely tense and at times violent situation. So that's a great example of where religious awareness could have maybe been extremely helpful. So religions of the world, we can look at a world map Purple is Christianity, green is Islam, and let's see, blue is Judaism, and red is Hinduism. So you can see really a lot of the major religions spread out really well. Now this doesn't give a very good idea of populations. It just shows geographically where a lot of these are. So here we see, oh, and also tribal religions in black. So you'll see tribal religions in like some northern parts of Canada, as well as in middle Australia and parts of Africa. And so these tribal religions, this is kind of a very general term, but could be from the native peoples, and there really should be some examples in the United States as well. So Christianity you see in the Americas, in some parts of Africa, in Europe, and Islam you see really spread out a lot over North Africa, the Middle East, and Pakistan, Afghanistan, parts of Asia over here. And Hinduism you see, India is basically all right here on this map, mainly Hindu. So why do you think that certain religions have spread to where they have? How do you think religions get carried or spread?
Understand that.
Boats and planes.
Boats and planes, yeah, they definitely could be. So as a great example, actually, you see there's an ocean right here that has to be crossed. You know, somebody's going to do that. And that's pretty much how Christianity comes to this whole swath of land. So yeah, boats, planes, somewhat, definitely now that we're in the modern age. So you'll see immigration, and if it happens, you know, from one of these different areas of the world, there could definitely be influence. As a great example, the area where I live, Redmond, Washington State, is right near Seattle, and we have Microsoft here, and there's actually a really large Indian American population. When I say Indian American, I mean from India, and there's a lot of great Indian food here, but also, really interestingly, there's a Hindu temple. So that's a wonderful example of how planes, now in our modern world, whenever there's a large population center, say somewhere in the United States of one ethnic group, they might bring a cultural or religious tradition with them. Great, so boats and planes. What are some other ways you think religion is spread?
Go ahead, say that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, what's your name? Go ahead, say it.
I don't know if you heard her, she said refugees.
Refugees, okay, that's definitely something that could happen. So again, probably more of a modern thing, but if you have a large concentration of people moving out of one place to another because of factors of conflict in their home area or persecution, or you have a large concentration in refugee camp, that could definitely be an example. Or you might see refugees say, actually you're right, this could happen, this is definitely a historical thing as well. When there was a lot of persecution of Jewish people in Europe, then a lot of Jews would flee to different parts of Europe or even south. So, great example. All right, any other ideas? How do you think religion is spread? How does it go? How does this from the Prophet Muhammad in Saudi Arabia, how does Islam go like that? Or Christianity, how does it just go like that, you know?
Joel, conversion.
Conversion, okay, so converting others to your faith. How do you think that could be done? So one, you could definitely like just walk up to someone and say, hey, here's my religion and why you should believe it, but that might not always work. What are some other ways conversion might happen?
Can anybody sort of expand on Joel's answer, other ways that conversion might take place?
She mentioned a specific example of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay, so Jehovah's Witnesses going door to door, really talking directly face-to-face to people. Great example. Now, what about, say, in the case of Christianity or Islam, that you really see really wide geographic swaths here?
Trey, stand up.
The spread from cultural hearts she's talking about.
All right, so they could definitely spread culturally. So another thing is that when, say, one big city becomes predominantly one religion, then people will start to kind of follow what a trend is. Another thing is that if any trade is going on, so you would see maybe like along the Silk Route, big trade routes, that different religions could be carried along with them. If books were distributed, then that would help as well. A lot of religious imagery was created to teach people about various religions. So you see, for example, in a lot of really big Catholic cathedrals, there will be the huge paintings depicting various scenes from the Bible, and that was not only basically a way to create great art, but it was really a way to reach out to people, especially those who could not read, through imagery. So that's something that you see being done a lot with Christianity. Now, how do you think Christianity got to the Americas, since there's this whole Atlantic Ocean as we cross? We know boats in general, but any historical background on that?
Christianity getting to the Americas. Travis? He's talking about sort of westward expansion and conquering of different lands.
Yep, so we see when the Spanish come over to Mexico and there's the conquistadors, so they basically overturn the whole Aztec way of doing things, and they bring in a lot of Catholic priests and missionaries, and that's how you see Mexico still very predominantly Catholic. In the United States, you'll see settlers coming from Europe, so think of the Pilgrims and Plymouth and all these different settlements up along the American coast, and you see Christianity being brought over here. Now, in a lot of cases, the native populations would not, they might not necessarily just decide, hey, I'm going to forget my old religion and totally switch to a new one. It took some convincing a lot of the time, and some of that was violent, and that you see happening really around the world. Sometimes it was, okay, you better convert, otherwise we have guns or swords or whatever weapon of your choice. So, if you look at this map of different religions, you can really see where they've started, how they've spread across the world. We're going to start with East Asian religions. This is a pretty quick overview. So Chinese folk religion is really based on a lot of ancient practices. It involves a lot of ancestor worship, respect of ancestors, and there are some traditions like when someone dies, burning paper money, and the idea is that kind of sending it up to the afterlife. You see a lot of actually across religions where there's an idea of, especially ancient ones, where there's an idea of sending money with dead loved ones to the afterlife, so I guess that that's commonality there. Confucianism, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people think, okay, technically kind of a philosophy, there's no deity involved. Confucius wasn't like, okay, go worship so-and-so, but Confucianism does have a lot of that belief system, that value system that we think is a definition of religion. So it stresses creation of a harmonious society through following really strict rules. So listen to the king, listen to your parents, and millions of generations of Chinese kids have suffered from their parents telling them, okay, you must be so pious and listen to Confucius and listen to me as a result. Well, it's definitely playing a huge role in Chinese culture because there is that idea of filial piety, so really having that respect for older generations, and you see that at play quite a bit. Taoism, it's spelled with a T, but it is pronounced with a D, weirdest thing ever, I know. And Taoist ethics emphasize compassion, moderation, humility. You might have seen the yin-yang symbol, so this is an example of something from the Taoist tradition. And Taoism isn't really strongly unified. There's no Pope at the head of Taoism. There's not really this big hierarchy going on, but it consists of numerous teachings based on various revelations. Shinto. How many of you have seen a Shinto shrine, like in a picture before? That look familiar to you? Seeing some raised hands? Great, so if you've seen a really famous picture from after the earthquake, and the only thing that was left standing was the Shinto arch, and also there's a famous picture from after the bombing of Nagasaki, same thing. And Shinto has a strong presence in Japan. It's a polytheistic religion. Polytheistic, can someone give a definition for that?
Someone want to give a definition? Say that and say it loud, Shane.
Belief in more than one God, great. So many gods, many, and theistic, so referring to gods. Polytheistic religion that emphasizes connection to nature, so a lot of animistic beliefs, belief in spirits, in animals, in different parts of nature. So that's East Asian. We see Shintoism in Japan, and Taoism in China, and Confucianism also in China, Chinese folk religion in China. And you see these religions, or parts of them, really spreading outward as well. So you can find elements, say, of Chinese folk religion in different parts of Asia. Dharmic and Indian religions, so Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism. You're probably fairly familiar with at least one of these. So Hinduism, how many of you have seen some of this imagery before. Maybe someone like wearing a red dot bindi on their forehead. Any of these images on the slide look familiar? Okay, seeing a few raised hands. So some of you are kind of already familiar with some of the imagery of Hinduism. Here's a great example of a really towering Hindu temple decorated all on the outside with this intricate sculpture, pretty much every layer of it. And so Hinduism is the most widely followed religion in India. You saw on that map how red for Hinduism really covered that entire giant swath of India. And it is a polytheistic religion as well, so many gods. 3 major gods are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. So there are these 3 gods, and they all have various different, I'm trying to think of the word, kind of like avatars that they have throughout life. So there's many examples of like, some of you have heard of the Ramayana. Anyone heard of that? Okay, so basically it's this really epic story in which Prince Rama, who is sort of an incarnation of Vishnu, goes out and does his heroic thing. And so they have all these different incarnations throughout time that are recorded. So Brahman is the absolute reality, not to be confused with the creator god Brahma. So there is sort of this one absolute reality, but there is the worship of many different gods involved. Kind of confusing, but really interesting when you look at the religion. And modern Hinduism grew out of the Vedas, which are Hindu sacred texts. The Vedas were originally created orally, but they were later written down. And this picture, by the way, that's a little faint, in the background is Shiva, the destroyer, and he's dancing because he's also god of the dance. And around him is this ring of fire, which represents destruction, flames. And he holds in his hand a drum, which is the constant beat of life. So you see how there's like this circular idea of life, just something going on, destruction, and all of these are some of the things encapsulated in his role. Here are some religious clothing and symbols from Hinduism. There's the dot on the forehead, the bindi, which is traditionally red, and the bindi can represent the third eye, which is thought to focus inward toward holiness. Buddhism. So I heard someone talk about the Eightfold Path. Anyone want to say a bit more about Buddhism? What do you already know about Buddhism?
You know about Buddhism, folks. You know a little bit about Buddhism. Anyone stand and tell us what you know about Buddhism? Ryan?
They believe in moderation.
I'm sorry?
He said that Buddhists believe in moderation or the middle path.
Definitely moderation, the middle path. Great, definitely a really important time in Buddhism. Now, does anyone know how Buddhism and Hinduism are connected? Do you think there's any connection between the 2 religions?
Connections between the 2? Anybody? Hunter?
The creator of Buddhism was a Hindu.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of that.
Say a little bit louder. You're right, go ahead. Say a little louder.
The creator of Buddhism was a Hindu.
Great, the creator of Buddhism. That's what you need to do, guys. Enunciate, always. Yeah, definitely a really awesome skill you have there. Yeah, the creator of Buddhism was originally a Hindu, although I'm sure that he probably didn't consider himself a Hindu anymore after he started Buddhism. Maybe he thought, okay, now I'm a Buddhist. But that was a long-winded approach. Yes, that's how Buddhism and Hinduism are connected. They also both started in India, and both have some idea of how you're reincarnated. The wheel of life just keeps on turning. However, Buddhism has ideas on how to get out of that. So the history of Buddhism is that it was formed by a prince named Siddhartha Gautama, and some of you have probably heard this story. So he's this really rich prince, and he's born, and the king and queen go to see a prophet who will tell them basically what their son's going to do in life. And the prophet's like, okay, either he's going to become a great king, one of the greatest kings that the world has ever known, which is pretty awesome, or he's going to just leave the palace and become a great religious person, sort of a monk and ascetic. And the king and queen hear this and they're horrified, and they're like, uh-oh, we're going to do everything to make sure he goes down the great king road, not the religious path. So they keep him indoors a lot, and when he wants to go out and see the world, he says, what am I missing? What's out there? Then they decide to hide all suffering from their son so that he won't be drawn to any kind of religion or philosophy. So they make sure that all the ugly houses are painted over with facades, and all the sick or dying or old people are basically shut inside houses. And then they bring the prince out on in a horse and carriage to see this beautiful town, and everything's going well until he runs into, on 3 successive days, a sick person, an old person, and a dead man. And this really shocks him to his core, and so even though he's married and has kids, he basically runs away and becomes the Buddha. So, little story about how he went from this prince in a palace to the founder of Buddhism. And so because he saw suffering, he was shocked by the world and pursued enlightenment. And we have a lot of stories. The Jataka tales basically describe the Buddha's life in previous reincarnations before he was the Buddha. And that's something you see a lot in Hinduism as well. Tales from previous lives before someone was Vishnu or Rama. So religious clothing and symbols of Buddhism. If you've seen any of the characteristic Buddhist monks wearing robes, if any of you have seen the Dalai Lama on TV, that's a great example. One of the symbols of Buddhism is the prayer wheel, which contains written prayers and is continually turned. Now, the interesting thing with Buddhism is that, like a lot of other religions, there are many different denominations or ideas. So, for instance, I was learning in my art history class about the different types of imagery produced by, say, esoteric Buddhism versus the Theravada Buddhism. So you see all these different divisions happening. Theravada Buddhism is one of the earliest forms of Buddhism, and you see that in Sri Lanka a lot. What are some other important denominations of Buddhism? Any ideas?
Travis? Well, she's asking about sort of the division, right, with the Four Noble Truths, but I'm not sure if we covered that too much. I mentioned it in my class as sort of in passing, that there is a Theravada and then another sect of Buddhism. Does anybody remember that? No, I don't think that we may not have covered that.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. There's really, it's just a question to sort of see what you guys about Buddhism. So there's Zen Buddhism, a lot in Japan, and so different imagery, different tradition, you'll see from that. There's rock gardens, so where rocks are in these intricate patterns, and it's pretty incredible to see. So Zen, Theravada, there's from older times, esoteric, Pure Land, different ideas, all having different traditions. So one big tradition in Buddhism is the turning of prayer wheels and chanting. That's a large part of some traditions. Alright, so that was Buddhism and Hinduism. Now Sikhism and Jainism. Who's heard of both of these? Anyone's heard of both of these?
Has anybody heard of Sikhism or Jainism?
No? Okay, well, here's a quick overview. So Sikhism, have you ever seen someone wearing a turban?
Yeah, we're getting some nodding.
Some people, obviously not everyone who wears a turban is Sikh, but Sikhism was founded on the teachings of Guru Nanak and 10 successive Sikh gurus in the 15th century. So if you think of it kind of like the equivalent of prophets or teachers in other religions would be the Sikh gurus. And so the wearing of the turban is a traditional practice in the Sikh religion because it's required for men to wear this. It's called the dastar, and some women wear turbans as well. So Sikhism advocates the pursuit of salvation through disciplined personal meditation on the name and message of God. So it really emphasizes a personal relationship with you spending your time meditating and really thinking hard about what your relationship, what your religion is within the teachings of Sikh religion. And a key distinctive feature of Sikhism is a non-animal concept of God. So what does non-animal concept of God mean? What does that weird term mean?
An idea of a non-animal concept of God. Someone said worship God without animals or using animals.
Worshiping God without animals, good thought. Well, non-animal concept of God means, well, think of how, okay, so in your minds, imagine kind of what is the traditional or Judeo-Christian imagination of God. What do you think of? What is the image that comes to your mind?
The image of God. Okay, go on, stand up and say it loud. He's old.
Okay, old. So a lot of times from artwork, for instance, if you've seen the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, maybe you've seen that famous picture where God is reaching out to Adam and life happens. Now in that picture, and in a lot of other pictures, God is depicted as a fairly old man. And in Sikhism, there's this non-animal concept of God. What that means is you don't think about God as like a person. Obviously, really, no religion thinks of God as quite a person, but in your imagination, in the image that you create, you think of, well, sort of someone who looks like you. So Sikhism, non-animal concept of God to the extent that one can interpret God as the universe itself. So, if you're Sikh, then God isn't necessarily like the man or a person. It could be everything, which is sort of an interesting thought. So that's a little bit about Sikhism. And so, yeah, you see the turban. There's a really big misconception that wearing the turban is something done by those of the Muslim faith, and that's actually Sikh. So, important to remember. Actually, there's been a lot of controversy about this because sometimes people who are Sikh and wear a turban have reported being discriminated against, or people will say really like ethnic slurs and stuff because of wearing the turban. General information about Jainism. So, here's the reason why you should now know about Sikhism and Jainism, or next time when someone asks, have you heard about Sikhism and Jainism, you can be like, yeah, I have. Jainism is one of India's oldest religions, and they also have a belief that I really haven't seen in a lot of other religions, which is total harmlessness to all creatures. And by total harmlessness, they mean total harmlessness as in some Jains actually will carry a broom with them and sweep insects out of the way as they walk so that you don't accidentally crush an ant or a beetle or whatever is crawling on the ground in front of you. Jains believe that every soul is divine and has the potential to achieve God consciousness. And Jains have an ancient tradition of scholarship. There are some Jain libraries in India which are India's oldest. So, Sikhism, Jainism, Hinduism, Buddhism, we've seen a bit of an overview. Are there any trends we see, any commonalities between some of these religions?
Josh, nice and loud, stand up.
Isn't like Jainism almost like Buddhism, when how they sweep the bugs out of the way so they don't step on them?
You mentioned a similarity between the Jainism and Buddhism and their high respect for all living things.
Definitely, yeah. A lot of Buddhists actually are, I wouldn't say, I mean, a lot. Probably quite a few Buddhists who are fairly devout, who are practicing, are vegetarian, and the same with Jains. So harmlessness to all creatures, big or small. That's sort of a similar idea you could see in Jainism and Buddhism. Great. Any other commonalities we see?
Joel?
We're all kind of originated in India.
Yes. Unsurprisingly, considering that this section is about Indian religions, but they all did originate in India. Now, one interesting thing is Buddhism. You don't find a whole lot of Indians practicing Buddhism anymore because it really just sort of actually migrated northward. So if you take a look at the map, like Buddhism started in India, but it really spread out to China, to Tibet, to Nepal, even out to Japan, Korea, this area. So it kind of left its original roots. And that's something interesting because like with Islam, you see that where it started, it really stayed and became very influential. But Buddhism just, you know, sort of went. So Buddhism started in India, didn't really stay around. Okay, so we looked at Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, drawn some connections there between them. And now it's time for Abrahamic religions, so these are probably the ones that you know the most about. Abrahamic religions, that name derives from Abraham, and Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all have a lot of common teachings and common stories even. So actually, something that might surprise you is Jesus, who is regarded as the Son of God in Christianity, is thought to be a prophet in Islam. So a lot of connections there between these three religions. Judaism. So some general information about Judaism. Jewish people follow one supreme being, God. Actually, pretty much Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all do. And Judaism was one of the first monotheistic religions. Definition for monotheistic, anyone?
Noah? You're going to have to say it louder than that, Noah.
They believe in one God?
They believe in one God, exactly. So mono, like one. So monotheistic religions, and that was really rocking the boat, because before that it was like you had your whole lineup of different gods that you'd be worshipping, especially in the Middle East. So this was something that really went against prior religious tradition. As a result, Jewish people were, for quite a while, persecuted in various places, and the Jewish holy book is called the Torah. The Jewish holy book, the Torah, in the Bible is comparable to the Old Testament. History of Judaism. According to the Jewish beliefs, Abraham was the first Hebrew and the father of the Jewish people. That's also where the name Abrahamic tradition comes from. And the Torah is the Old Testament in the Christian Bible. So the Torah contains the 10 Commandments, which Jews and Christians both follow. So there are different denominations of Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we're running out of time. Orthodox Jews interpret and follow the Torah very strictly, so what is put down in the Torah is what they follow. Conservative Jews accept both traditional and modern ways of studying Jewish texts. They believe that Jewish religious texts can kind of evolve over time, so it'll change to how people are living today. And Reform Judaism, no surprise, is the largest Jewish denomination in the United States, more liberal than conservative or Orthodox, and has a reformed way of looking at Judaism. Okay, so we're going to quickly cover Islam. Monotheistic religion again. Followers of Islam are called Muslims, and Muslims believe in one supreme being called Allah. Muslims believe that Muhammad was Allah's final prophet, and Muhammad began preaching in Mecca, which is now a Muslim holy city. So if you ever have the chance to go to the Middle East and you go to Saudi Arabia, where Mecca is, there are millions of people that go every year to circle the Kaaba, which is the big black monument in the center, and basically profess their faith. That's actually one of the 5 pillars of Islam, is you have to go to Mecca. And after facing hostility from enemies in Mecca, he migrated to Medina, which is like the second most holy city in Islam. And Muhammad was very successful in spreading Islam because by the time of his death, much of the Arabian Peninsula had converted to Islam. So this one guy traveling around the Middle East converts pretty much the entire Arabian Peninsula to Islam, which is pretty huge. I mean, makes you feel like kind of an underachiever. Okay, so here's the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. There are like 12 different spellings of this. You could see it with a QU, a QU dash, a KO, Al-Quran as well, ALC, or L-QUR apostrophe AN. So, according to Muslim belief, the Quran is Allah's revelation to Muhammad. And the text of the Quran consists of 114 chapters, and each one of these chapters is known as a sutra. So, that is Islam, and here are the 2 major divisions, Sunni and Shia. And I'm not going to do the whole overview, but quickly, where have you heard the names Sunni and Shia before? Anyone? Okay, so if you watch current events, or you watch the news at any point in time, you've probably heard a little bit about denominational conflict. So a lot of times Sunni and Shia members, though both Muslim, will have conflicts, and they might not even be related necessarily to whose belief is right, but long-standing ethnic conflicts as well. So for instance, during the Iraq War, a lot of conflict between Sunnis and Shias going on. So the reason that there's these 2 different denominations of Islam, the Sunni believe that the successor of Muhammad should be whomever was the most capable. So it could be one of his friends, it could be his brother-in-law. In this case, it was a close friend. The Shiite believe that the successor should be a relative. So they decide that the successor of Muhammad should be Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law instead. So, as a result of that disagreement over who should be next, we have huge stuff going on today. Conflict and disagreement. So, there are the 5 pillars of Islam, which you guys are familiar with. And I'm going to quickly, so Christianity. Most of you are probably familiar with Christianity being the majority religion in the United States. So I think it's okay if we don't spend quite as much time discussing Catholic versus Protestant, but obviously the major religious text is the Bible, divided into the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the 10 Commandments, like in Judaism, play an extremely important role in the set of beliefs that are handed down. So now I want to quickly go and see if we can have a little bit of a discussion, some questions, if any of you have questions about what we've just covered. I know it went through a little bit fast for certain religions. So any questions I can answer?
Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Adora about maybe expanding on some of the things that we've learned about in our class or what she's talked about today? Some questions that you feel that Mr. Black or I did not ask or did I answer? Or you'd like a little bit more detail on some of the things we've learned about with religion in our classroom? If so, you need to you can raise your hand. You can stand up and please speak very clearly so that you can hear. Last step first.
So, in Buddhism, Buddha is portrayed two different ways. One way he looks starved and skinny, and the other way he looks fat and jolly. What is your outlook on which one's more relevant?
I too have noticed that, and because I'm half Chinese, whenever I go to China, then the one that you see is definitely always the fat Buddha, and he's so happy, and he's like this, it makes me smile. But there's really no right depiction of Buddha, but the Chinese version, or the Asian version of the fat Buddha is a little bit inaccurate considering what we know about the person who founded Buddhism, who basically starved himself as he was seeking enlightenment. So if you really think about it, he would have been like stick thinny. Boy, that was horrible. Stick thin or skinny. So yeah, I guess basically the Indian version of the depiction of Buddha would be a little bit more accurate historically. However, it's like there's really no one way to portray anyone in a religion. So actually, and I'm not sure where the fat Buddha comes from. I think it was actually, there's a little bit of blending of Chinese folk religion involved there as well as like whoever's fat is prosperous. So some of that going on. But yeah, Indian depiction is probably more style.
Thank you.
Hunter, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I did.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you like your job?
Do I like my job? Yeah, I do. I think it's really fun. Basically, whenever I'm doing research for a presentation, when I'm preparing for it, I learn a lot myself, so that's awesome. And I realize that, you know, if you can really expand your world as much as possible, if you can really go beyond what you're seeing right now, you know, this group of people in the room with you, you guys are all fairly similar. But if you can really expand your world of knowledge to encapsulate the whole world, the solar system as well, if you're interested in that, then you really gain a lot of understanding about who you are. So by looking outward, we can also look inward, if that makes any sense. So, in summary, I like my job because it allows me to learn a lot about myself and other people.
Macy?
Do you get like red paper envelopes? Like on New Year's Eve or?
Do I get red paper envelopes? Yes, I do. Actually, this is one of the huge perks of having Chinese grandparents. This is huge, as in we will get, like, over time from when I was a baby to now, I have collected a killing in money from my grandparents in those red paper envelopes for everything. For Chinese New Year's, we get money. For our birthday, we get money. For, like, pretty much any time we go over for a big celebration, celebrating, I don't know what, there is money in a red paper envelope. Yeah, that is pretty awesome. Now, of course I'm saying that without really, my grandparents don't do this because they're religious. They're really like not religious at all. Coming from communist China, as they did, it wasn't really a part of daily tradition, but there's that part of Chinese folk religion involving red paper envelopes, a bit of Confucianism, the old, like giving stuff to the young. That's all involved in that tradition there. So it's kind of cool to see these different cultural traditions blending. All right, any last questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know how like some religions keep going, but then there's some that don't prosper as well as others?
Why do some religions not last?
Yeah.
Good question. So yeah, we see a lot of religions that haven't lasted. Like for instance, the whole Aztec practice of tearing your heart out for ritual sacrifice to give blood to the gods, that did not last. And I think that at some point, when the number of people that you're able to convert is a lot lower than the number of people who are basically old or who are dying, and believe in your religion. Basically, when you can't get a new batch of converts every couple of years, your religion isn't doing well. So in order to be sustainable, you really have to have a following from all ages. So some religions did that really well, some religions didn't do that very well. A lot of times also, like a lot of South American religions, when the conquistadors from Europe came over and brought Christianity with them, they sort of wiped the old religions out. So any time that one group of people is conquering another, or there's conflict between two religions, and whoever wins is really pushing their religion on the other group of people, then you'll see that happen a lot. So the religions that don't last are the ones that can't get new converts and that might be persecuted, or whose members would be too scared to practice their religion openly. All probable examples. Any other questions?
Hunter, do you want to ask another question? Go ahead.
Do you still go to school?
Yes, I do still go to school, so I'm a sophomore in high school, and I take some online classes so that I can continue teaching and traveling for speaking. So like next week, I start a big, basically over the coming 2 months, I'm going to be giving, I think, like 4 speeches in different parts of the world. So yeah, it's kind of a whirlwind. Anyhow, I take 2 classes at my local brick and mortar school, so online and in person, and I teach as well. So continually finding education everywhere, sort of my motto. Okay, well thank you all very much for learning about world religion with me. I hope that you've enjoyed and that you can take the knowledge that you've learned from this and really apply it in your worldview. And next time you hear a story, yes, you really should be looking in the news for stuff about religion. Next time you hear a story about, say, someone being discriminated against because of a practice you've seen here, or maybe different conflicts breaking out because of disagreements over some of the religions we talked about, you'll know exactly what they're discussing. All right, thank you so very much.
Thank you, girls.